Alright, well, now that I have something tangible, it's probably time I did a devlog, huh? Hi, I'm Adrian, and I'm an aspiring game developer. This is my game called Gage after the main character. As for what it's about, well, Gage here can wander around, work on his music, and enjoy the park with two of his friends during a yearly local holiday. As for the mechanics and inspirations, well, there's a bit. I took a lot of inspiration from games like Voez for the rhythm portion, the Gen 5 Pokemon games for the 2.5D aesthetic, and Omori for the story and world building. Oh, also that one episode of Adventure Time where... But most of the footage doesn't really look that impressive, does it? And clearly I've been working on this for a while, haven't I? I mean, I used footage of it in the first video I posted to this channel almost a month ago, and barely anything's changed, so what the hell have I been doing with my time? Well, a lot of things actually. Most of which just involve learning a lot of artistic techniques that I am of course still bad at, but at least I made a rock by following a tutorial. Progress. Anyways, this devlog is focused on something I am slightly better at, which is both being a tool and making tools. See, in order to develop a game, or do anything really, you need the right tools. There's the obvious tools like the game engine, 3D modeling software, and painting program, but then there's the things that you don't really think about when starting a project that sort of make themselves known later on. For instance, my game has a lot of dialogue. And what needs to happen when you have a lot of dialogue? Well, normally you'd just put it all in an Excel spreadsheet, apply a typewriter effect, and call it a day, and this is how it looks. God, it just feels so wrong. See, if you want to do what all the cool kids are doing, you need dialogue to be more dynamic. I'm talking about pausing in the middle of sentences, variable text speeds, highlighting words, you know, game feel. Here's the issue though, you can't get this information from a single string. I mean you can, but it'll just look really disgusting, and I, for one, will not stand for it. So what did I do other than build a dialogue system around supporting my erratic needs for game-feely dialogue, and then build an entire ass dialogue editor for it? I won't go into too much detail about how it works, but essentially text is broken up into multiple segments, so I can change the individual variables of each segment at will. The data then gets exported to what I have discovered to be the best file type, JSON, and loaded in whenever I need it in the game. Overall, I'm happy with how this turned out, especially since it was my first attempt at making anything like this. It is still clunky, and there's plenty of room for improvement, but considering how much I have to define for just a simple NPC interaction, I'm kinda glad I made an editor since it will save me a lot of time in the long run. So yay, I have a dialogue editor now. Truly, I am the coding god. I can take on any task and do it with ease. What could possibly go wrong? So the next task I tackled was one that I had been ignoring for a long time, but one that I was finally ready to do. And that task? Making a beat map. My first attempt was not planned, and it shows, but I think we can all learn from it. By far the biggest issue was how inefficient it was to actually use the editor. Like, not only could I not preview the song without literally exiting the scene and loading a test scene, but to get to, say, the 60th beat of the song, I would need to click this arrow 60 times. I think I got maybe 8 hits in before realizing this method was bad and abandoning this editor altogether. I don't know what I was thinking. Clearly, I wasn't. And the worst part about it was that I invested a lot of time making the UI and whatnot, all for it to be kind of a waste. But either way, if you're gonna make an editor for anything, do not make it like this. So yeah, clearly I learned nothing. My dad at some point reminded me that since I was doing things in JSON, I could basically make the editor in any language, and I thought, now that you mention it, there was a GDC talk on that exact subject that I of course saw a few years ago and never bothered rewatching. I vaguely remembered something puzzle script, and after looking at that again, my takeaway was somehow, what if I just made a JSON parser that took in a simple text input where I could use letters to denote beats? So that's exactly what I did, and honestly making module beat types was a good idea. It also meant that I could just load in the beatmap directly from the file and not have to build a bunch of UI to handle things in a more formal editor, so overall it sounded like a good idea. That is, of course, until I started actually making the beatmap. I mentioned in my video about game feel and rhythm games that beatmaps work because the music itself serves as the audio feedback, which means that you're going to want to build your beatmap around the sheet music or tabs of a song. And lucky for me, plain text tabs of the song I was working with, Color by Paniolo, was available on ultimateguitar.com. So the plan was simple really, just copy-paste the tabs into a text file and make a parser, change the beats to make it feel more like a game, and bada bing bada boom, I have my first beat map. But then I realized these tabs aren't really the most reliable. Like, sometimes the distance between notes meant wait 4 beats, and sometimes that same distance meant wait 2. Like, note spacing seriously had no correlation with time, and I spent maybe 4 hours just deleting characters to time everything properly. And since I couldn't even start the song from any point, I had to listen to the entire thing every time I noticed the timing of the later notes was slightly off. Needless to say, this wasn't working. This was not saving me time, this was wasting it. Especially when you consider that I probably won't have access to plain text when designing songs I'll actually use in the game. So I went back to the drawing board, but this time knowing what had worked in the past and what hadn't. And this time, I did something very bold. This time, I made a plan. The plan, of course, being to search for a voice beatmap editor and just do whatever Andrew FM did. You may call it stealing code, but I call it taking heavy inspiration and learning how to do things properly. And really, I didn't even steal that much, since my game is pretty different than voice in a few key ways. One of the major problems of this voice editor I found was how it handled the editing of tracks. I'm not sure if there was a better way to do it, quite honestly, but it really was cluttered and unintuitive in terms of managing the UI. Luckily, this was due entirely to the variable track count in voice, and since I'm going for a guitar situation, I'm only going to ever have 6 strings, no more, no less. But I did end up taking the keyframe system that was being used since I didn't really think of it before. See, this is why open source code is nice. You can learn so much from what other people do, and it's not technically stealing because it's meant to be used by other developers. So after I got the string animation set up properly, I got to work implementing everything else basically. Mostly this slider at the bottom that can take me to any point in the song, and the ability to add beats of any type or color from a predefined list, taking from the module system from the second editor. Oh, and previewability. That saved me way too much time when I remade the beatmap using the third editor. Like, I can't stress enough how important this was. Anyways, here is the final result of all of that. Ultimately, I'm really happy with the results, even if it took me a while to get there. And I think I'll be able to make pretty much any beatmap I want once the artwork and music are in a more ready state. In conclusion, tools are a nice thing to have for your game, mostly because they will save so much time in the long run, even if you have to spend a few weeks developing them. Trust me, the final JSON file for 40 seconds a song came out to be over 1,000 lines. I would have literally died trying to type that all by hand. If you need a starting point for making tools to help for things like level design or dialogue trees for your own games, a link to a very informative GDC talk will be posted in the description, so go check that out. All the speakers are entertaining, informative, and generally really cool. Anyways, this has been Adrian. Like, comment, and subscribe if you want to. Remember that I love you, especially Andy, and peace out.